My mother left me in a Walmart parking lot when I was 13 years old. Not for 5 minutes. Not for an hour. She drove away and didn't come back for 10 years. And when she finally showed up at my door, desperate and broken, begging for forgiveness, well, let's just say karma has a twisted sense of humor. What I told her that day changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, on that scorching July afternoon that would define the rest of my life. It was 97 degrees outside, and the asphalt was so hot you could see waves rising from it. I remember because I spent the next 6 hours standing on that burning pavement, waiting for a mother who would never return. My name is Sydney, and this is the story of how abandonment taught me everything I needed to know about survival, success, and the sweetest revenge imaginable. You might think you know how this ends, but trust me, you don't. The fight started over something stupid. It always did with my mother, Patricia. She had this way of turning the smallest disagreement into World War III. That morning, she'd asked me to clean my room, and I'd rolled my eyes. Just a typical teenage eye roll. Nothing dramatic. But to Patricia, that eye roll was the ultimate act of disrespect. "You ungrateful little brat," she screamed, her face turning that familiar shade of red that meant trouble. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, let's see how smart you are when you learn some real respect." I should have known something was different that day. Usually, her punishments involved taking away my phone or grounding me for a week. But this time, she grabbed her car keys with a look in her eyes I'd never seen before. It was cold, calculating, and absolutely terrifying. "Get in the car," she said, her voice eerily calm. "We're going for a ride." I hesitated, something in my gut telling me this wasn't going to end well. But what choice did a 13-year-old have? I got in the car, and we drove in complete silence to the Walmart on the other side of town. The silence in that car was suffocating. I kept glancing at my mother's profile, trying to read her expression, but her face was blank, emotionless, like she'd already made a decision and nothing I could say would change it. My hands were sweating. I wiped them on my jeans over and over, a nervous habit I'd had since I was little. The radio wasn't even on. Just the sound of the engine and the occasional turn signal clicking in the oppressive quiet. I wanted to apologize, to take back that stupid eye roll, but something told me it wouldn't matter. This wasn't about the eye roll anymore. This was about something bigger, something that had been building for years. When we pulled into the parking lot, my mother turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Here's your lesson in respect," she said. "You can get out here and think about how you've been treating me. When you're ready to apologize properly and show me the respect I deserve, you can call me." She handed me a crumpled $5 bill. "There's a payphone inside. Use it wisely." I stared at her in disbelief. Surely she was joking. Surely she wouldn't actually leave me here. But as I sat there, frozen in shock, she reached across me and opened my door. "Out," she said simply. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I stumbled out of the car, still convinced this was some elaborate bluff. Any second now, she'd tell me to get back in, and we'd drive home in awkward silence like we always did after her dramatic episodes. But instead, I watched in horror as she put the car in reverse and backed out of the parking space. Our eyes met through the windshield for just a moment, and I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't a temporary punishment. This was goodbye. The car disappeared around the corner, and suddenly I was alone in a way I'd never been before. The parking lot stretched out around me like an ocean of hot asphalt, filled with strangers going about their normal lives while my world crumbled. I stood there for what felt like hours, certain she'd come back. She had to come back. Mothers don't just abandon their children in parking lots. But as the sun climbed higher and the heat became unbearable, reality began to sink in. She wasn't coming back. Not today, maybe not ever. I walked into the Walmart in a daze, the air conditioning hitting my sweaty skin like a slap. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the sounds too loud. Families walked past me, parents holding their children's hands, and I wanted to scream at them. Did they know how lucky they were? Did they understand that not all mothers love their children unconditionally? I found the payphone near the customer service desk and stared at it for a long time before finally picking up the receiver. The metal was cold against my ear, and my hands shook as I fed quarters into the slot. I called our house first, listening to the phone ring endlessly. No answer. I tried her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Her voice, so familiar and yet suddenly foreign, told me to leave a message. What was I supposed to say? Hi Mom, it's your daughter that you just abandoned. Could you please come back and get me? I hung up without saying anything. I tried calling my grandmother, but she lived 3 states away and had never gotten along with my mother anyway. There was no one else. I was truly, completely alone. The hours crawled by like years. I sat on a bench outside the store, watching people come and go, hoping against hope that one of those cars pulling into the parking lot would be hers. A security guard asked if I was okay, and I lied, telling him my mom was shopping inside. He seemed satisfied with that answer and moved on. I watched him walk away, part of me wanting to call him back, to tell him the truth, to beg for help. But another part of me, the part that was already starting to harden, told me to stay quiet. If I told anyone what happened, they'd call social services. I'd end up in foster care. Maybe my mother would get in trouble. Maybe she'd come back out of obligation, out of fear of consequences, but not because she actually wanted me. And somehow, even at 13, I knew that would be worse than being abandoned. At least this way, I knew exactly where I stood. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that should have been beautiful but just felt mocking, I finally accepted the truth. She wasn't coming back today. Maybe not tomorrow either. Maybe not ever. I had 2 choices. I could go to the security guard and admit I'd been abandoned, or I could figure out how to survive on my own. I chose survival. That night, I slept on the bench outside Walmart, using my backpack as a pillow. It was the longest, most terrifying night of my life. Every sound made me jump, every shadow could have been a threat. I was just a kid, alone and vulnerable in a world that suddenly seemed full of dangers I'd never considered. A drunk man stumbled past me around midnight, muttering to himself. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly near the entrance around 2 a.m., and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't notice me. A police car drove through the parking lot around 3 a.m., and I pretended to be asleep, terrified they'd ask questions I couldn't answer. But something else happened that night, something that would shape everything that came after. As I lay there, cold and scared and more alone than I'd ever imagined possible, I made myself a promise. I would survive this. I would become stronger than the woman who abandoned me. And someday, somehow, I would make her pay for what she'd done. Not with violence or cruelty, but with success. I would become so successful, so accomplished, so undeniably valuable that she would have to face what she'd thrown away. That promise kept me warm when the night got cold. It kept me calm when fear threatened to overwhelm me. It became my anchor, my purpose, my reason to keep going. The next morning, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez found me. She was a social worker who happened to be shopping early before work, and she immediately recognized the signs of an abandoned child. I was dirty, exhausted, and trying to wash my face in the Walmart bathroom when she approached me. "Honey," she said gently, "are you okay? Where are your parents?" I looked at her, this stranger with kind eyes and a soft voice, and something inside me broke. I started crying, really crying, for the first time since my mother had driven away. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't panic or call security. Instead, she sat down next to me on the bathroom floor and waited until I could breathe again. "Let's get you something to eat," she said finally. "And then you can tell me what happened." We sat in the Walmart McDonald's, and I told her everything. About the fight, about my mother's cold smile, about the longest night of my life. I expected her to be shocked, to tell me that mothers don't do things like that, to assure me it must have been a misunderstanding. But Mrs. Rodriguez had been a social worker for 15 years. She'd seen worse. Much worse. You're very brave, she said when I finished. What you did, surviving that night on your own, that took incredible strength. But you don't have to be alone anymore. I'm going to help you. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't judge or lecture. She just listened, and then she said the words that would change my life. You're going to be okay. I promise you that. And somehow, even though I had no reason to trust anyone anymore, I believed her. Mrs. Rodriguez became my guardian angel, helping me navigate the foster care system and eventually placing me with the most incredible family I could have imagined. The Johnsons were everything my mother wasn't. Patient, loving, supportive, and genuinely interested in helping me heal and grow. Sarah Johnson was a high school English teacher with a warm smile and an endless supply of patience. Her husband, Michael, was a software engineer who loved terrible dad jokes and made the best pancakes I'd ever tasted. They had no biological children, had been foster parents for 8 years, and had been waiting for the right child to adopt. Apparently, I was that child. They never tried to replace my mother or pretend that what happened to me was okay. Instead, they gave me something I'd never had before: unconditional love and the tools to build a real future for myself. Sarah helped me process my trauma through journaling and therapy. Michael taught me that not all adults would abandon me when things got difficult. Together, they showed me what a real family looked like. But even as I thrived in my new environment, I never forgot that parking lot. I never forgot the feeling of watching my mother drive away, or the cold realization that I meant so little to her that she could abandon me without a second thought. I carried that pain with me, but I also carried something else: a burning determination to prove that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Every good grade, every achievement, every step forward was motivated by the same thought: someday, she'll realize what she threw away. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that sometimes worried my foster parents. While other kids were hanging out at the mall or going to parties, I was in the library, studying for AP tests, researching colleges, planning my future with military precision. "Sydney," Sarah said one evening when she found me studying at midnight, "you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're already enough." But she was wrong. I did have to prove something. I had to prove that I was worth keeping, that I was valuable, that abandoning me had been the worst decision my mother ever made. I graduated valedictorian of my high school class. At the ceremony, Sarah and Michael sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. I scanned the crowd, part of me still hoping to see my mother's face, hoping she'd somehow heard about my success and come to witness it. She wasn't there. I earned a full scholarship to business school and started my first company before I turned 21. It was a small tech startup, nothing revolutionary, but it taught me everything I needed to know about entrepreneurship, about building something from nothing, about turning ideas into reality. I sold that company for $200,000 when I was 22 and used the money to fund my education and my next venture. By the time I turned 23, I owned 3 successful businesses and had a net worth that would have shocked my 13-year-old self. My main company, a digital marketing agency, had contracts with major brands and employed 15 people. My second business, a consulting firm, helped other entrepreneurs build their startups. My third venture, a small real estate investment company, was steadily growing my passive income. I'd bought a beautiful house in the best part of town, drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary, and had built a life that was everything my mother had never been able to provide. I had a closet full of designer clothes, a wine collection that would impress sommeliers, and a bank account that grew larger every month. But success, I learned, doesn't heal all wounds. Late at night, when the business calls were done and the meetings were over, I still sometimes found myself thinking about that parking lot, wondering if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted what she'd done. Did she lie awake at night wondering where I was? Did she see teenagers on the street and think of me? Did she feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused? I got my answer on a rainy Tuesday in October, exactly 10 years and 3 months after she'd abandoned me. I was working late in my home office, reviewing contracts for a new client, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my security system showed a woman standing on my porch, hunched against the rain. Something about her posture seemed familiar, but it wasn't until I opened the door that I realized who it was. 10 years older, grayer, thinner, but unmistakably her. My mother stood on my doorstep, looking like she'd aged 20 years in the decade since I'd seen her. Her hair, once dark and glossy, was now streaked with gray and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face was lined with wrinkles I didn't remember, and her clothes looked worn, faded, like she'd been wearing them for days. Her eyes, though, those were the same. Still that pale blue that could turn cold in an instant. "Sydney," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh my God, Sydney, is it really you?" She looked me up and down, taking in my expensive clothes, the marble foyer behind me, the obvious signs of success and wealth. I was wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than her entire outfit, designer jeans, and the kind of subtle jewelry that screams money to people who know what to look for. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I've been looking for you for so long," she continued, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, baby. The biggest mistake of my life. Can you ever forgive me?" I stood there in my doorway, looking at the woman who had shaped my entire life through her absence, and felt a strange calm wash over me. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since that day in the parking lot. All those years of building my life, of becoming successful and strong and independent, had led to this confrontation. She wanted forgiveness. She wanted to be welcomed back into the life she'd abandoned. But what she was about to get was something very different. "Hello, Patricia," I said, using her first name deliberately. The flinch that crossed her face told me she caught the significance. Not Mom. Not Mother. Patricia. A stranger's name for a woman who'd chosen to be a stranger. "You're right, you did make a mistake. The biggest mistake of your life. But not for the reasons you think." I stepped back slightly, not inviting her in, making it clear that this conversation would happen on my terms. The rain was getting heavier, and she was getting soaked, but I made no move to invite her inside. Let her stand in the rain. Let her feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. It was a fraction of what she'd put me through. "You want to know what your mistake was? Your mistake was thinking that abandoning me would break me. Your mistake was believing that a 13-year-old girl couldn't survive without you." Her face crumpled, and she reached out toward me with a trembling hand. "Please, Sydney, I was going through such a hard time back then. I wasn't thinking clearly. I never meant for it to be permanent." "You never meant for it to be permanent?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Patricia, you left a 13-year-old child in a parking lot with $5 and drove away. What exactly did you think was going to happen?" She was crying now, mascara running down her face in black streaks. "I thought you'd call and apologize, and I'd come get you, and we'd work things out. But when you didn't call, I got scared. I didn't know what to do. And then days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and I was too ashamed to try to find you. I thought you were better off without me." "So you're saying you abandoned me for my own good?" I asked. "That's your story?" "No, I'm saying I was weak and stupid and scared, and I made the worst decision of my life. But I'm here now. I want to make it right. I want to be your mother again." I laughed, and the sound was cold even to my own ears. "You looked for me?" "Patricia, I was 13 years old. I was a child. It was your job to come back for me, not my job to call and beg you to be my mother. And you know what? I'm glad you didn't find me sooner. Because if you had, I might have been stupid enough to forgive you. I might have let you back into my life before I understood what you really were." The rain was pouring now, and she was shivering, but I still didn't invite her in. "What I really was," she repeated, her voice shaking. "Sydney, I'm your mother. I love you. I've always loved you. I just made a terrible mistake." "No," I said firmly, and I felt the power of that word, the finality of it. "You're not my mother. A mother doesn't abandon her child in a parking lot. A mother doesn't drive away and leave a 13-year-old girl to fend for herself. You're just a woman who gave birth to me and then decided I wasn't worth the effort of raising. I could see the words hitting her like physical blows, each one landing with precision, and I wasn't done. Not even close. Do you want to know what happened to me after you left? Do you want to know what your lesson in respect actually taught me? She nodded eagerly, probably hoping for some story of redemption, some narrative where her abandonment had somehow been a blessing in disguise, where I'd tell her that leaving me was the best thing she ever did because it made me stronger. But that's not the story I was going to tell her. I spent that first night sleeping on a bench outside Walmart. A 13-year-old girl, alone, scared, with nowhere to go and no one to call. I could have been kidnapped, assaulted, killed, and you wouldn't have even known. Because you were too busy teaching me respect to care about my safety. Her face went white, and I could see the reality of what she'd done finally sinking in. Oh God, Sydney, I never thought you assumed you'd call someone, go to a friend's house. But we both knew that was a lie. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she drove away. She'd just never bothered to think about the consequences. But here's the thing, Patricia, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. That night on the bench was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it taught me that I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. It taught me that the only person who would ever truly have my back was me. And it taught me that some people, even people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, will abandon you the moment you become inconvenient. I could see her starting to understand that this conversation wasn't going the way she'd hoped. The tears were flowing freely now, mixing with the rain, and she was shaking, whether from cold or emotion I couldn't tell. Please, she whispered, and her voice was so small, so broken. I know I hurt you. I know I failed you. But I'm here now. I want to make it right. I want to be your mother again. Again. I laughed, and this time there was genuine amusement in it. Patricia, you were never my mother. Not in any way that mattered. You were just a woman who happened to live in the same house as me for 13 years. My real mother is Sarah Johnson, the woman who took me in when you threw me away. She's the one who helped me with homework, who celebrated my achievements, who held me when I cried. She's the one who taught me what real love looks like. She's the one who sat with me through panic attacks and nightmares. She's the one who taught me that I was worthy of love, that I deserved to be kept, that abandonment wasn't my fault. The mention of another mother figure seemed to break something in her. She started sobbing openly, reaching out to me again with both hands now, desperate, pleading. But I gave birth to you. I raised you for 13 years. That has to count for something. I changed your diapers, I fed you, I took care of you when you were sick. Doesn't that mean anything? And there it was, the entitlement that had always defined her. Even now, even after everything, she thought she deserved credit for doing the bare minimum before abandoning me entirely. You want credit for 13 years? I asked, and my voice was sharp now, cutting. Fine. Let me tell you what those 13 years were really like. You want to know what I remember about my childhood with you? I remember walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set you off. I remember you screaming at me for hours over tiny mistakes. I remember you telling me I was ungrateful, disrespectful, worthless. I remember feeling like I could never do anything right, like I was just a burden you had to bear. I remember you comparing me to other kids, telling me why couldn't I be more like them, why did I have to be so difficult, why couldn't I just be normal? Each word was carefully chosen, designed to cut deep. Because this wasn't just about that day in the parking lot. This was about 13 years of emotional abuse, 13 years of being made to feel like I wasn't good enough, 13 years of living with a woman who saw motherhood as a chore rather than a privilege. So no, Patricia, those 13 years don't count for anything. If anything, they make what you did worse. Because you didn't just abandon a random child. You abandoned a child you'd already spent 13 years damaging. You abandoned a child who was already broken, who already believed she wasn't good enough, and you confirmed every terrible thing she thought about herself. She was crying so hard now that she could barely speak, her whole body shaking with sobs. I was young, she managed to get out between gasps. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know how to be a mother. My own mother was terrible to me, and I didn't know any better. I was just repeating the cycle. I was doing the best I could. And there it was, the excuse I'd been waiting for. The classic abuser's defense. It's not my fault because someone hurt me first. It's not my fault because I didn't know better. It's not my fault because I was doing my best. You know what, Patricia? You're right. You didn't know how to be a mother. But here's the difference between us. When I realized that, I chose not to have children until I could break that cycle. I chose to get therapy, to work on myself, to make sure I would never inflict that kind of damage on an innocent child. You chose to have a child anyway, and then blame your failures on your own childhood. You chose to repeat the cycle instead of breaking it. That was a choice, Patricia. Your choice. I could see her deflating with each word, the hope draining out of her eyes as she realized that this reunion wasn't going to end with forgiveness and reconciliation. But I wasn't finished. I'd been carrying this speech around for 10 years, rehearsing it in my head during sleepless nights, and she was going to hear every word of it. Do you want to know what the real tragedy is? It's not that you abandoned me. It's that you robbed me of the chance to have a real mother. Because of you, I'll never know what it feels like to have a mother who loves me unconditionally, who supports me, who's proud of me. Sarah does her best, and I love her for it, but there's always going to be this hole in my life where a mother should have been. And that's on you. But I am proud of you, she said desperately, her voice rising with panic. Look at what you've accomplished. Look at this beautiful house, your success, everything you've built. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. You're so strong, so successful, so amazing. And that, right there, was the final insult. She wanted to take credit for my success, to somehow claim that abandoning me had been part of some grand plan to make me stronger. You're proud of me? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You're proud of the woman I became despite you, not because of you. Every single thing I've accomplished, I did without you. Every success, every achievement, every moment of happiness I've found, I built from the ashes of what you destroyed. You don't get to be proud of that. You don't get to claim any part of my success. You don't get to stand here and pretend that abandoning me somehow contributed to who I am today. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of rain hammering on the porch roof and her quiet sobbing. I could see her processing everything I'd said, finally understanding that there would be no happy ending to this story, no tearful reunion, no second chances. No Hollywood moment where music swells and we embrace and all is forgiven. So what happens now? She asked finally, her voice small and defeated. Do I just leave? Do I never see you again? Is that what you want? I considered the question seriously. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face and never think about her again. But there was something else I needed to do, something that would complete the lesson she'd started teaching me in that parking lot 10 years ago. No, I said finally. You don't just leave. Because I have something for you. Hope flickered in her eyes again, pathetic and desperate, and I almost felt bad about what I was about to do. Almost. I reached into my purse, which was sitting on the table by the door, and pulled out a crisp $5 bill. I'd been carrying it with me for 3 years, ever since I'd become successful enough to afford this gesture, waiting for this moment. Here, I said, holding it out to her. This is for you. Consider it a gift from the daughter you threw away. She stared at the money in confusion, not taking it. I don't understand. What is this for? I don't want your money, Sydney. I want you. I want my daughter back. But I could see the recognition starting to dawn in her eyes, the memory of another $5 bill on another terrible day. It's exactly what you gave me when you abandoned me, I said, and I pressed the bill into her hand, forcing her fingers to close around it. $5 and the advice to use it wisely. So here's my advice to you, Patricia. Use this $5 to call someone who cares about you. Because it's not me. It will never be me. You made sure of that when you drove away from that parking lot. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She stared at the money like it was a snake, understanding finally that this wasn't an offer of reconciliation but the final, devastating blow in a war she'd started 10 years ago. "You can't mean this," she whispered, and her voice was breaking. "I'm your mother. You can't just throw me away like I'm nothing. Like I don't matter. Like these 10 years of regret and pain don't mean anything." "I'm not throwing you away," I said calmly, and I felt the power in my voice, the certainty. "I'm giving you exactly what you gave me, a chance to figure out how to survive on your own. The only difference is, you're an adult who made her own choices. I was a child who deserved better." I stepped back and put my hand on the door, ready to close it, ready to end this chapter of my life forever. "Goodbye, Patricia. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But you won't find it here. You won't find forgiveness here. You won't find redemption here. You won't find the daughter you abandoned. She doesn't exist anymore. You made sure of that." I started to close the door, but her voice stopped me one last time. "Wait," she called out desperately, her hand reaching out to stop the door. "Please, just tell me one thing. Do you ever think about me? Do you ever miss having a mother? Do you ever wish things had been different?" It was such a pathetic question, so needy and self-serving, but something in her voice made me pause. Maybe it was the genuine pain I heard there. Maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, part of me still remembered being a little girl who loved her mother. "You want to know if I miss having a mother?" I said, and I let her see the pain in my eyes, the wound that would never fully heal. "Every single day. I miss having someone to call when I get good news. I miss having someone who would have been at my graduation, my business launches, all the important moments in my life. I miss having a mother so much it physically hurts sometimes. There are moments when I achieve something amazing, and my first instinct is to call my mom, and then I remember that I don't have one. Not really." Her face lit up with hope, thinking this was the opening she needed, but I wasn't finished. "But I don't miss you, Patricia. Because you were never my mother. You were just the woman who made sure I'd never have one. You were the woman who taught me that mothers are supposed to love you, but sometimes they just don't. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." And with that, I closed the door. The sound of it clicking shut was final, definitive, like the closing of a book. I stood in my beautiful foyer, listening to her crying on the other side of the door, and felt something I hadn't expected: peace. For 10 years, I'd carried the weight of that abandonment, the anger and hurt and confusion of being thrown away by the one person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. But now, finally, I understood that her abandonment had never been about me. It had been about her own failures, her own inability to love anyone but herself, her own brokenness that she tried to pass on to me. I watched through the window as she stood on my porch for a long time, probably hoping I'd change my mind and invite her in. She clutched that $5 bill in her hand, staring at it like it held all the answers. Eventually, she walked away, disappearing into the rain just like she'd disappeared from my life all those years ago. The difference was, this time, I was the one choosing to let her go. This time, I had the power. This time, I was in control. The next morning, I called Sarah Johnson, my real mother, and told her about the visit. She listened without judgment, offering comfort and support just like she always had. "I'm proud of you," she said when I finished the story. "It couldn't have been easy, but you handled it with more grace than she deserved. You're stronger than you know, Sydney." And that's when I realized something important. I did have a mother. I had someone who loved me unconditionally, who was proud of my achievements, who would always be there for me. Patricia's abandonment hadn't robbed me of that after all. It had just led me to the mother I was always meant to have. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Patricia. In it, she apologized again, begged for another chance, and tried to explain her actions. She wrote about her own childhood, her own pain, her own struggles. She wrote about how she'd been thinking about me every day for 10 years, how she'd driven past that Walmart parking lot hundreds of times, how she'd imagined what she would say if she ever found me. But at the bottom, she'd written something that made me smile. I understand now why you gave me that $5. I understand what you were trying to teach me. I just hope someday you'll give me the chance to prove I've learned the lesson. But she was wrong. The lesson wasn't for her to learn. It was for me. The lesson was that some people will abandon you, betray you, hurt you in ways you never thought possible. But that doesn't mean you're worthless or unlovable. It just means they weren't capable of seeing your worth. The lesson was that you can't control what other people do to you, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to let their failures define you, or you can choose to rise above them and build something beautiful from the wreckage they left behind. I never responded to her letter. I never reached out, never gave her the second chance she was begging for. Because some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Some people, once they've shown you who they really are, don't deserve the opportunity to hurt you again. And some lessons, once learned, don't need to be repeated. Today, I'm 25 years old. I run a multi-million-dollar company, I have friends who love me, and I have a family that chose me just as much as I chose them. I've built a life that's everything I dreamed of during those dark early days in foster care. And sometimes when I'm driving past a Walmart, I think about that 13-year-old girl standing in the parking lot, scared and alone and convinced her life was over. I wish I could go back and tell her that she was wrong. Her life wasn't ending that day. It was beginning. The woman who abandoned her wasn't taking away her future. She was giving her the freedom to build a better one. And the pain she was feeling, the sense of worthlessness and abandonment, would eventually transform into strength, determination, and an unshakable knowledge of her own worth. But most of all, I wish I could tell her that someday, when that woman came crawling back, begging for forgiveness and a place in the life she tried to destroy, she'd have the strength to look her in the eye and say exactly what she deserved to hear. You had your chance to be my mother. You chose to throw it away. Now live with that choice, just like I had to live with the consequences of your actions. The difference is, I survived and thrived. You'll just have to survive. That's the real lesson of respect, Patricia. Not the twisted version you tried to teach a 13-year-old girl in a parking lot, but the real thing. Respect is earned, not demanded. Love is given freely, not extracted through manipulation and abandonment. And family isn't about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when the world falls apart. You taught me all of that, just not in the way you intended. So in a twisted way, I suppose I should thank you. Because your worst moment as a mother became the foundation for my best life as a woman. Your failure to love me taught me how to love myself. And your abandonment led me to the family I was always meant to have. The $5 you gave me that day? I still have it, framed in my office as a reminder of how far I've come. And the $5 I gave you, I hope you spent it on something worthwhile. Because it's the last thing you'll ever get from me. This is Sydney, signing off. To anyone out there who's been abandoned, betrayed, or thrown away by someone who was supposed to love them, your story doesn't end with their failure. It begins with your choice to rise above it. Make it count.